we're all sort of accustomed to living in this sort of abnormal times, but it feels like things are slowly getting back to normalcy, right? More vaccines are going in, productions are up and running. There's also live sports, some movie theaters are opening. In this environment, what are some of the biggest challenges that you're hearing from your clients? Denise, maybe you want to take that?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for having me. Really, a lot of the conversations we've been having over the last month, particularly, and even the months leading up to April and sort of this period of time that we're going into in terms of long-term investments, conversations have really revolved around flexibility. That's been the number one topic that comes up in every meeting that I'm having with clients. The industry proved to be able to be reactive last year, right? Yeah. We were able to make changes at the drop of a dime. So that flexibility is something that is key because, as you mentioned, because of the pandemic, there's been so many economic disruptions to our clients' businesses, and there's still some uncertainty. There's still issues with supply chain, commodity availability in the back end of the year. So, number one, first and foremost, is how do we maintain that flexibility? And then I think secondarily, the second topic that comes up just as often is really about being very intentional about our media choices moving forward. And why are we spending in that particular area? How are we going to measure it? And then leading into how does that contribute to my ROI? So because of the economics of the pandemic, I think both of those two factors are leading into a lot of our decision-making in terms of where we invest.
Yeah, and I would also add, while we were going through, especially those early months of the pandemic, we saw some real changes in where our clients, to Denise's point, like everything was so intentional. And when I look at where our clients intentionally leaned in, and we didn't know, are these trends going to continue? One was like absolutely e-com, right? Because everybody was shopping from home and it just accelerated all of the growth projections, exponentially. Right. And our clients leaned into e-com in a big way. We did with our partners, and there is no sign of that letting up, even as the pandemic starts to get better and things are starting to return to normal. I would also say podcasting is another area that was sort of exploding, and it's continuing to grow. It's a small base, but there is a tremendous amount of interest in that category as well, more like passion projects and streaming video, right? Like streaming video is just, and I'm sure we'll talk about it lots in this panel.
Yeah.
But the growth and the viewership, but then also the ad opportunities and the ad innovation has been pretty tremendous.
So more flexibility. Yeah, go ahead, Liza.
No, lastly, I just wanted to say one thing I would add to that is, as we talk about embracing all of those platforms, I think our partners were very conscious of their tone, right? So what is your tone when you have a mass broadcasting message in prime time, in comedy and news? And then as you dig a little bit deeper, John just talked about how important social video is, but you want to make sure that your tone is appropriate and taking into account, everybody is handling this pandemic differently, and making sure that you're, speaking to people in an understanding and compassionate manner.
So, the fact that all of us are working from home and having to do this remotely, I'm sure is also, a new challenge, right? And is that something you guys have feel like you've fully kind of overcome, or is that still a work in progress? How do you guys feel when you're, working with all these clients?
I mean, I can jump in 100%. I feel as if it's actually brought us a little bit closer, not only to our own people, but as well to our clients. It's a much easier transition for me personally to be able to go from one client to the next and really build a connection. So it's, whereas at the beginning, I think it was a little bit more of how do I interact in this space? I think people have become very comfortable with interacting in this space now, and have really talked about the benefits of it, right? The accessibility and our ability to really communicate with our clients at a moment's notice. So for me, I have found it beneficial. That's why I think some of this will remain as we move forward, because that accessibility to clients across the board is just beneficial because of what's happening in the marketplace, right? There's so much happening on a constant basis. This can't be a conversation that we're having 3, 4, 5 times a year. This is something that we're having out 3, 4, 5 times a month on what's going on with a client's business.
Yeah, I personally find it refreshing. I was on a plane pretty much every week, you know, and that ended February 2020. So I've really been given the gift of time. You can manage your calendar a lot better. It's more under your control because you're not, you know, waiting on mass transit or whatever it might be. I also feel like it's leveled the playing field a little bit. We've been able to, you know, for smaller meetings, like Denise said, there's just a greater connection. If you're not in the same city as somebody, oftentimes you would just pick up the phone, but now we have this video conferencing. But also with larger meetings, you don't have restrictions about room space and logistics and travel expenses. So we've really been able to invite a larger group to some of those larger meetings and really help that career path for some of the younger employees within the agency and at our clients.
Well, those are all great points. And yeah, sorry, Susan, please go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think there's a bunch of us who think that we've actually done our best work in the last year because all the extraneous things went out the window. And it was really about, you know, every day was about what should we be doing in this environment for our clients, for our employees. And, you know, those 3 hours a day where people were commuting, we're working instead, right? So like there's pluses and minuses to everything, maybe a little less steps getting to and from places. But it's just much more efficient this way, I would say. So I would imagine in the future, there'll be a more balanced, you know, whether it's, you know, to Liza's point about like being on a plane all the time, like, do you really need to take, you know, 5 hours in your day to basically fly to a city nearby or not? You know, I think there will be changes that will allow for this efficiency, but I think we're also all welcoming back, you know, just seeing our colleagues and, you know, having real interactions face to face.
Yeah, no, I agree with all of those. I mean, I was one of those guys who was on the plane all the time. And yeah, to your point, you know, being able to participate in discussions, no matter where it is, I think is such a welcome thing for most of us without having to actually fly in there. And so that brings me to sort of, we are in the upfront season and, you know, upfronts used to be this big gathering once a year in New York. You know, that's probably not happening. But also the whole, as you guys mentioned, the viewing habits have changed. There's a lot more activity on streaming and others. So, you know, how relevant is upfront, or is there anything changing at all in that process? And Denise, you've been at Mindshare for a very long time. You probably have seen lots of changes. So what's your perspective on that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And our clients also challenge us with that type of question as well. And my response is, as long as the commodity that we're trading for and with is scarce, there's going to be a need for a long-term investment strategy. And I use that term purposefully and intentionally instead of using the word upfront, because I feel as if a year ago versus now, so much has changed that it almost feels like that term is a little bit antiquated. And so I have been continuously talking about is what is our long-term investment strategy? So as the managers of your investment portfolios, what is the long-term investment? What is the reason why we should be considering a long-term investment on your behalf? And how does that fit into your overall audience strategy? So as you mentioned, with the growth of streaming, you're talking about the ability to now speak to people on a one-on-one basis. So if we're talking about, you know, that type of change, how does that fit into our long-term investment strategy, right? Because into our overall audience strategy. You know, there's been a lot of conversation about, you know, if the long-term investment strategy is about what's scarce, then what gets included in that? So I think that's another conversation we've been having. Having this long-term investment idea is more than what it was in the past, where it was just about buying and trading linear inventory. It's inclusive of so many other pieces now. So there's conversations about what are the streaming services offering, you know, what are the different audience targeting offerings that each of the partners that we deal with during this long-term investment strategy period, what are they offering and how does that fit into our overall audience strategy?
And Susan, on the digital side, is upfront evolving differently, or how is the fact that on the television there may be slightly different ways of buying? How is that impacting on the digital side?
So, for really years now, we really go to market as one team, right? So, we work very closely with Denise, with Liza, with the other portal, we call them portal representatives. And that has, at least 3 years been a joint approach, because it's all, it's forms of distribution of premium content. And if anything, I would say that because of the, just tremendous growth of streaming, that there's even more reasons for us to, just strengthen that collaboration and make sure that, when we have things that we want to see change, get better, measurement, et cetera, we're approaching this as one, regardless of the form of distribution. Also, it allows for much more innovation, right? So instead of having innovation, only on broadcast or only on digital, it's what can we do cross-platform that is unique for our clients? And we have just tons of examples, and it's something that we ask our partners to bring to us, with every discussion that we have, because we do want to stand out. And our clients have taken advantage of so many of the opportunities that we've brought to them to be first in market. And it's just resulted in, tremendous work, ROI, and case studies.
So do you guys see sort of the measurement that is used becoming more uniform across these formats? How you measure digital may be similar to what you do on TV or vice versa. Is that sort of a new trend that we should expect?
Yeah, so I would say this is something we've also been working very closely as a team together. So along with our research group, listen, there's measurement challenges across platforms. We do need more uniformity. There's many places we think we should be moving to audience versus traditional forms of guarantees. But how do we do the verification if we move to audiences in a way from some of the traditional? I will tell you that, and it's not a secret, but transparency is an issue of schedule with some of the partners in terms of we want to know where our ads ran, right? Mm-hmm. And sometimes when we move from linear into streaming in a big way, it's very top line reporting, and that can't continue. Just like, with digital ad networks or with linear, if we run a do not air list on linear television, and we get spot affidavits, right? So we know where every single spot ran. We need that same level in the streaming digital platforms. And the answer can't be, well, don't worry, we applied your do not air list. And it's but we can't tell, okay, show me where we ran. Oh, we can't do that, but take my word for it. We applied it. That's not going to continue. So those are lots of the types of conversations that we're having. The measurement piece in terms of audience is one piece, but the transparency is also very important.
Accountability, yeah.
Just building off of what Susan says, in my opinion, measurement serves two purposes, right? So there's the measurement as it relates to currency, and we need to have a uniform currency to negotiate within a marketplace. But then there's measurement that determines our clients' success against their KPIs. So I think as an agency, we're really pushing to sharpen the measurement tools available as we look at everything holistically to really make sure that we're, we're being accountable and making good, responsible investment decisions, and that we're delivering upon those, but also that we're helping our partners and our clients build their businesses and measure their own KPIs. So to me, that's sort of the two kind of roads that we need to push and have been pushing, as Susan said, for years in the measurement space.
Yeah, that's exactly the reason why, lots of the conversation revolves how are we chasing the audiences, right? The audience are flowing into these areas, and why there isn't necessarily this huge rush into that area, because there's still significant lacking areas of measurement. And we need to feel comfortable, back to my first point about being intentional about our investments. This is what we think you're going to get, and this is how we think it's going to contribute, to Liza's point, to your KPIs internally. I mean, these numbers still have to be reported to CEOs as to, how every marketing dollar is working harder than the one before it. And just because there is an explosion in streaming doesn't mean that we can spend every dollar there either, you know. So I think the idea of measurement and unifying how all the ecosystems are talking to each other becomes more and more critical, particularly as streaming continues to grow.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all agree kind of that there is a need for uniform currency, but it's also a very fragmented media landscape, right, with linear and streaming. What are your feelings about sort of the, you know, the old panel-based approach versus maybe getting more deterministic data? You know, at LG Ads, which is, you know, my employer, we talk all day about this, right? Which is, you know, there are millions of TVs now with the ability to measure sort of what people are watching on streaming versus linear TV. But certainly that data set, whether it's from LG or other TVs, are not really in sort of a currency state. You know, is that something that you think the industry wants, or is it evolved to something else over time?
So I think it's very important to remember sort of progress over perfection. And I think, you know, everybody has knocked Nielsen for years, but there are billions and billions of dollars that are traded on the currency of the measurement that Nielsen has, they've set forth. We can poke holes at it. And I think we should poke holes at it, and we should continue to try and push to be better. I think as we look at the overall landscape, I think we need to look at it holistically, and we need to draw in commonalities so that we can do our best to make planning decisions and make investment decisions while we're kind of trying to push. I think sometimes when you want a perfect measurement solution that is consistent across all of these platforms, and we're talking about linear, audio, digital, out of home, cinema. I mean, all of these platforms are very different. And so sometimes I feel like we're trying to put a square peg in a round hole just for the sake of having consistency. I think what we need to try and figure out is what is the best measurement, but then how can we kind of bring that all together when we look at an overall investment plan?
A great point. And sort of staying on that same theme, you all mentioned streaming quite a bit and how that's, you know, growing and how important it's becoming. Liza, can you talk a little more about sort of how you see sort of streaming or, you know, CTV ecosystem fitting into the media plans this year?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's really important for teams to look at a holistic video plan when they start to plan their media, and when it transitions to an execution. And I think, you know, we talk a lot about this consumer landscape, consumer evolution, consumer journey. We're all watching premium video, if you will, very differently than we watched it a year ago. As I mentioned, I used to be on an airplane. I'm in this business because I'm a big fan of premium video, and I watch a lot of content, but I used to watch it almost exclusively on my iPad on an airplane. And now I watch it very differently. I'm probably one of those people who've gone a little bit more back to using my cable box, if you will, now that I'm home. But I think it's important to look at, first of all, who is the audience that you're trying to reach, and where do they sit within that consumer landscape? Obviously, we've talked about how younger demographics are more and more, you know, going into the streaming landscape for the first time ever. For 18 to 34, time spent with streaming has surpassed time spent with linear. And as we don't like to admit, we get older every day. So that 18 to 34-year-old is pretty soon going to be an 18 to 49-year-old, and kind of watch those trends. So when you're specifically talking about your media plan, where does your audience fit within that consumer journey, and figure out, you know, what is the right portion of your media plan to reach consumers as they're engaging with premium video across the different platforms. I think it's really important. CTV is a really big piece of it. I think it's important. We on the agency side know that there's many different ways to engage and buy CTV. There's direct, there's programmatic, there's through the ad networks. It's a very muddled and wild, wild west landscape, if you will. It does not have uniform measurement, as we've discussed. I also think it's important to understand, where does social video sit on that? We know that probably somebody who's watching over an OTT or connected TV device is probably going to have more devices in front of them as we're watching. That's just kind of a something that's come up in research as the type of person who tends to watch not in a linear box or not in a cable box, but with those means tends to be multitasking at the same time. So think about the social video or the other interaction or engagement that you can use, and some of the technologies that you can use to read what's on the glass in front of you and also what's on the mobile device. So I think it's really important to kind of look at that holistic video overall when you decide what pieces and then how you want to implement them.
Yeah, and I think CTV, that conversation has morphed out of a young person's conversation now, right? It's not just about the younger skewing brands. So the role that CTV is playing in each of our plans moving forward, when we think about what happened during the pandemic and you're looking at 50-plus-year-olds, they showed the steepest decline against linear television in the last year and the greatest adoption of CTV. So when you're looking at brands, it's not just an 18 to 34 conversation on what role CTV plays. It's for brands that are 18 to 49 or 18 or 25 to 54, because your audiences also are embracing CTV at a much higher pace at this juncture. So I think the conversation around CTV, where it usually was more towards the younger skewing side of the demographics, now it's encompassing across the board. And what role, again, does it play in your overall audience strategy?
Yeah, I agree. I think with, on the LG ad side, we see all of these trends, right? We've seen over the last 18 months, a huge acceleration of adoption across all generations, across sort of all types as well. It's not just for watching movies. People are now discovering, sports and other content on streaming. I think consumers are no longer, deciding sort of where they're watching. They just want to watch content and they want to watch it now. So if it's on live TV, great. If it's not on live TV or linear TV, let's find a way to watch that on streaming. And which means all of these, smart TVs have to get smarter in terms of how to, make that content visible and available, discoverable more easily, right? And I think that's certainly the focus for how we are thinking of innovation, going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And that leads right back to what we said about flexibility. If the world you're describing is an on-demand world, I get the content when I want it and how I want it. So our media, as we progress moving forward, needs to be flexible and responsive to where consumers are consuming a piece of content, where they're utilizing it. And it goes back to that. So to me, the partners that are going to benefit most in the future moving forward are the ones that are the most flexible with us, that are most adaptable to what consumers are doing out there in the marketplace.
Great. Susan, how are your clients thinking about multicultural media in today's environment?
Yeah, so we've had a multicultural specialist group at Group M, and then also embedded into each of the agencies for, I don't know, like over 5 years, right? Like this has been something that's very important to us. I will say in the last year, especially with the the marches and what happened last summer with George Floyd, there was definitely a resurgence from the industry, from our clients, from our employees. Like, what are we doing to embrace more combination of multicultural and also news? Because we understand how important it is that diverse voices are heard, they're supported. So we've really done a reboot, I would say, over the last year in terms of, having very close partnerships with properties that either were owned by diverse audiences, Hispanic or Black, Asian American, LGBTQ, because they tend to get left out when so much of the money goes to some of the larger, whether it's networks or social platforms or streaming partners. Those voices, right? Like the developing up and coming properties have a tougher time. So what we did over the past year is to work very closely to make sure that they're introduced to the right clients, that if they, for example, didn't have a programmatic capability, that we had a small team internally that were able to, like, in addition to their regular jobs, like counsel in terms of getting up and running programmatically, We've built discrete marketplaces for Black audiences, multicultural in general, Asian American, LGBTQ, and many of our clients have leaned into it, right? But the reality is a lot of the properties are small that we're putting together to activate programmatically. So it can't only be a digital programmatic activation, right? It has to be, what are we doing with, whether it's audio partners, some of the new up and coming YouTube, either creators or influencers, that's important as well. So we're putting this all together for our clients so that it's a very easy turnkey way to quickly get up and running with more diverse audience owners and creators, right? Like, of course, we've always been reaching and targeting, but that's easy to do in platforms. So again, we want to make sure that it's going beyond platform spend to reach multicultural audiences to like very specific, whether it's broadcast, television, broadcast radio, streaming audio, and then streaming TV, and especially digital. So, what we've seen a lot of progress. We've seen a lot of clients that have upped their goals and percentages about supporting multicultural audiences, but it's not done. I mean, it's not done by a long shot. We have a lot more to do, and we want to get so that it's not something that we are constantly, benchmarking and having to say, you know what, you're running a little under, okay, you're doing fine. Like, it should be every day. It should be, and I don't know, is that going to take 2 years, 3 years, 5 years? I don't know, but I'm hoping that it's more like 2 years and that we're not having this conversation in 5 years, because it's something that we're just looking at every day. And we've grown our partnerships with important multicultural properties every day, not just when something happens in the news.
Yeah.
And our clients have been really supportive. The media partners have been tremendous and awesome. And I'm very hopeful that we're going to see a real sea change.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's been refreshing to see that attitude. Traditionally, people have kind of stayed away from areas that they thought were, either controversial or, didn't appeal to them. But, I think this year brands have embraced that and said, we are going to, speak out about this, and we are going to show our support. So I'm really glad to hear that, you guys are driving this forward in such a forceful manner. Switching topics slightly, I think, brand safety, wanted to hear sort of what are your thoughts about that, and, especially with regards to sort of news, and, is there anything that specifically we should be looking at from a brand safety aspect there?
Yeah, so I mean, listen, like, we fight that good fight every day. And we have from the beginning when, Group M was, the company that insisted on, brand safety, third-party verification. We started with viewability, but quickly moved over to brand safety. And we do that with, all of our digital partners, streaming partners, social partners. And I think that we've done, and listen, this is like Joe Barone, John Montgomery, they've done a tremendous job in moving this forward with industries like GARM, among others. But a place that we're taking a special look at in addition to multicultural is journalism. And in addition to the private marketplaces that we're having for multicultural, we're also building private marketplaces with key partners for ease of programmatic activation in local news, right? And I think everybody knows that, over 2,000 newsrooms have closed, in the last, I think, 10 years. And there's just, what we call news deserts across the US, where there's like many towns and even small cities that they don't have local news anymore. And we think that that's harmful on so many levels. And part of the reason we got here was in the switch from newspaper to digital. There were many, many brands that didn't want to be associated with digital news because, it was tough to avoid some of the more controversial or harsh news or news around violence. So we've worked very closely to identify with news properties, if a client doesn't want to be on like the front page of, the site, that maybe we can be in the sports section, the entertainment section, the money section, the travel section, right? There's lots of ways to support so that we're still supporting, the properties that need to retain their hard-hitting journalists to make this world a better place. And this is another area where we've had lots of interest from clients, to take a look at what is their news strategy, right? There's certainly more neutral and safe news properties, but as you go into digital, we want to make it really comfortable for our clients to support it. And that's been a combination of our inclusion lists of, these are news sites that are not filled with disinformation or extreme opinion pieces, but really just like report the news and then do good investigative journalism. Our job is not to be censors, but there are certain standards that we want to support that are the standards of most journalism society organizations, right? So, do you monitor comments? Do you retract when you make a mistake? There's some basic things that, we want to make sure that the sites that we're supporting meet those common standards. And again, a place where we've seen a lot of buy-in from clients, but I hope in a year that we're not having this conversation all the time. And it's, of course, we should be supporting responsible news journalism, of course, and that it's part of our day-to-day versus special conversations.
I mean, I totally hear sort of what you're saying, especially given, on the digital side, you can do more precise targeting. You can have those inclusion, exclusion lists that can be changed quite often. Are there issues on the television side, like on the linear TV side? Like how do you decide, whether the client wants to work with a particular network or not as views change, right? And is that something that you are constantly kind of evolving as well?
Yes, and that really does vary from client to client, right? Because there's clients who might be most comfortable in, early morning news and late night news, perhaps local news. Some are very comfortable being in the cable news environment, but have very particular choices of what they do or don't want to support. So we do take their leads, but we do also advise in terms of like back to the, ethics of journalism, who does things like print retractions or broadcast retractions, when they're wrong, is there basic fact checking, right? So again, it's like, it's up to the clients to decide, what they're comfortable and not comfortable supporting. So what we try to do is help them navigate what's more neutral versus what's more opinion-based, which is the tougher places, and that what areas they should definitely stay away from, because they do promote, whether it's disinformation or they don't fact check or print retractions.
And what I've found is in the last year, putting out this sort of game plan to our clients across different media types, for TV, into digital, into their social platforms. That is something that we do regularly now. So it's almost as if we've become this look-see into what's going on in the news and how our clients need to be ready to react or not to react to it. So it's happened more often in the last year than it has in my entire private, career before that. Where now we have to be more, hey, we are hearing that there could be a big announcement today, or whether it was the recent verdict in the Chauvin trial, how does our media want to play out in that space? And doing a lot more of that lean forward. So, we actually have to be more in tune on what's going on in the news and how our media can have a rub-off effect by being surrounded in that media. And that's happened a lot more over the last 12 months than it has ever happened before. And I don't see that changing moving forward, where we are partnering with our clients to, as Susan mentioned, giving them a playbook as to, here are the different things that could happen. We're certainly not playing the role of censor nor making decisions. It is a client by client decision, but giving them sort of the lay of the land based on your different media opportunity or the media that you're participating in, how it could be affected by a certain news cycle or a news story.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to the tone that we were talking about earlier. I think there's the general best practices that Susan and Group M have laid out, but then it is a client by client specific conversation, because you have to take a look at the creative and the campaigns that they're supporting at that time, and make sure that you think about them in specific environments and with, as Denise mentioned, specific announcements. I mean, the world has been very volatile over the past 14, 15 months. And so just making sure that, your messaging is If it runs right after, a big announcement, how does that message look and feel as opposed to in a different environment?
I think we are almost out of time, so let me kind of pose a final question to all of you, and some of it we've been covering here already, which is, as you look at sort of audience-based buying or planning versus more context-based, where the ads are appearing, what's the surrounding media of that. What is the balance, or how do you see that changing between linear TV, digital CTV? Is one more important than the other?
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to the long-term investment strategy that I mentioned earlier, right? What role does long-term investments, which to be frank, normally includes a big bulk of that is linear television. What role is that portion of your business going to play when you think about your overall audience strategy? So I think that's a big part of the conversation we have with each of our clients. And it's going to be dependent on the client. I've used a visual of a puzzle piece of a long-term investment strategy, and the size of that puzzle piece versus your audience strategy is different depending on the client, right? So the richness of their in-house data, their richness of the targeting against who they want to talk to is very dependent on how large a piece a long-term investment fits with your overall audience strategy. So I think it varies by client, and that's why all the conversations we're having are so fascinating and interesting to us, because I think it goes across an entire spectrum as to how they want to play in this space moving forward. And frankly, I'm super excited to be in this business right now, because it's a huge inflection point, and how we move forward is being decided, frankly, by the people on the phone right now, right? So we're actually setting standards on where we think this business should be moving forward and what role targeting plays in that strategy. So lots more to come, lots more questions to be answered, but exciting time. And when we're looking for partners that want to partner with us in the truest sense of the word of figuring it out, where no one's claiming to have all of the answers, but really want to partner with us in terms of finding what those questions are and what the new way of working should be.
Yeah, and I think when determining sort of the answer to be addressable or not to be addressable, I think there is a place for addressable on every plan, but I think it's really important to look at the size of the audience that you are trying to address and outweigh, what the price point against that target is. Sometimes it's actually better to have what we call a little bit of waste, because those could be potential new consumers. And sometimes it's really important to be very specific with your message and very targeted. So I think, as Denise mentioned, we talk about dialing that up or dialing it down, depending on the universe of the different audiences that we're trying to target.
Great.
Yeah.
Susan?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think in the world of, addressable TV, right? Like that's the holy grail of, the intersection of, household, content, data, tech, like it's all there. But, to Liza's point, like what's the actual scale that's available? What's the price point that's available? And, that's what we're constantly evolving and testing.
Great. Well, thank you all, and that's all we have for today. And it's been my pleasure to have you all on the panel, and I really enjoyed the whole discussions, all of the discussions.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Raghu.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you guys. Again, Raghu, Denise, Susan, Liza, really wonderful having you all join us. I mean, even going back to the beginning of your conversation, talking about, some of the big impacts and the areas of growth like e-commerce and streaming. I feel like I'm alone responsible for, and if everybody else's behavioral, changes, mirror mine in some ways. And I could see how those categories would be very easily exploding with no signs of slowing down. But this is a really wonderful and insightful conversation. I know we're all looking forward to kind of changes in the measurement side of the ecosystem that you were talking about on digital video. So hopefully we'll have you back again soon.